without any further ado, I'm gonna call upon my one of our very dear brothers, Brother Mohamed Shedou from Chicago. Brother Mohamed Shedou is from one of the very valued members of Faizan International. Brother Mohamed Shedou brings a very delicate and very precious connection between Afghan, Faizan International, American, and also Egyptian diaspora in Chicago and Faizan International. He has written many articles. He has accomplished translating a lot of teachings of Maulana Faizani in Arabic, a lot of his core teachings in Arabic. Brother Mohamed Shedou is one of those members of Faizan International that when I have question about Arabic, or we have question about Arabic, we look at him. We look at him for advice, and people do in Faizan International. So I'm so proud, I'm so pleased and honored to call upon my dear brother Mohamed Shedou. I run out of words when I talk about these noble brothers and sisters. So I do apologize if I say less, because I'm speechless by my dear brothers and sisters around here in Faizan International and around the globe, all of you guys. So Brother Mohamed, I'm gonna go ahead and pass on the mic to you. Please cherish us as always with your beautiful speech, and we listen to you. Brother Mohamed.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Do you hear me?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mic is yours, my dear brother.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Brother Hasib, for the beautiful introduction, as always. And of course, for giving me the opportunity to speak about the Prophet ﷺ in this blessed day. So as I was thinking today about what could I possibly say about the Prophet? It's hard to speak about his life. We all heard about his life, and it's hard to add anything from my perspective about the Prophet's life. So I said, let me just, as a simple human being, as a simple ordinary Muslim, how can I really think about the Prophet's life in his birthday? So I thought, really, the thing that I should be thinking about is, what can I do to follow his footsteps? And that's really what the Sunnah is all about, right? The Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ means that it's what he said, what he did, that we can learn of as Muslims, and we can do in our life, and we can use in a very practical way. So I thought, okay, let me pick some of the most important things, especially in our modern world. So the Prophet ﷺ, he passed away 1400 years ago. We, as Muslims, we believe that his Sunnah is universal. It's not limited by time and not limited by location. So you can follow his Sunnah wherever you are and whenever you are, which means, Muslims 1,000 years ago, they should follow the Sunnah, but also Muslims today of the 21st century, they also can find in the Prophet's life and in the Prophet's teachings things that they can use today in our modern world. So I thought about it from that perspective, especially. As an ordinary Muslim in the 21st century, what are some of the things I would really like to focus on when I think about following the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ? So 5 things came to me, and 5, maybe, we have 5 pillars of Islam, we have 5 daily prayers, so maybe the, number has a significance here. But I thought, okay, what are the 5 things that in our modern world, a Muslim should think of when we try to follow the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ in a very practical manner? But also, one thing I wanted to do, as we speak about each one of these, I wanted to assess our situation as Muslims and evaluate where we are on each of these categories of teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. So the first thing that I would like to focus on is the importance of knowledge and education. And there are so many, of course, verses of the Quran, no doubt about that, but also a lot of hadith from that the Prophet ﷺ said that emphasize the importance of education and knowledge. And for example, al-hikmah dallatul mu'min fariha biha inama wajadaha. So the Prophet said, wisdom is something that a believer seeks and is happy to find it wherever they can, which means you are happy to find wisdom, to find knowledge, whether it came from a Muslim, whether it came from a non-Muslim. as Muslims, we should be happy to find wisdom and knowledge from any source. And also a very important hadith, طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم ومسلمة. Seeking knowledge is a duty on every Muslim man and every Muslim woman. And that hadith always strikes me that the Prophet ﷺ emphasized here that every Muslim man and every Muslim woman, because as we know, the hadith usually speak about the believer, which encompasses man and woman, but in this special hadith, the Prophet focused on both. Why? Maybe because, he knew, or some issues in our culture as Muslims where maybe women remain uneducated in some areas. So this hadith is very clear. Knowledge is a duty on every Muslim man and every Muslim woman. And of course, for example, the hadith that we focus a lot in our school, Maulana Faizani, تفكر ساعة خير من عبادة سنة, contemplating for 1 hour is better than worship for 1 year, and another narration for 60 years. So here's the importance of education as the Prophet ﷺ emphasized in his hadith. So in our modern world as Muslims, we can think of that, how do we follow the footsteps of the Prophet in this, in our 21st century? So obviously, one very important thing that we should focus on is university and college degrees, right? Muslims should really be interested in pursuing knowledge in this modern format, which is our, colleges and our different degrees. Also, we have in this time and age, we have so many sources of knowledge that were not available, for example, 50, 100 years ago. And things like, YouTube and the media, we have maybe thousands of documentaries that show us how the universe is and show us other cultures if we want, documentaries about history. So really an unlimited supply of knowledge and education that is so easily available to us today in the modern world. So that's another way that we can follow the footsteps of the Prophet in the 21st century as Muslims, and of course the availability of books and all these things. So very quickly, again, I try to be brief. Seeking education and knowledge is one very important way for us as modern Muslims to follow the footsteps of the Prophet. And now I would like to assess. So as I mentioned, we're going to take one aspect, one teaching of the Prophet, and we'll try to assess where we are today, especially as Muslim communities. So I think, it's sometimes a lot of what I say will sound like negative or, finding the faults, but the only way to fix things, the only way to improve is to understand the state and the current, as we say, constructive criticism, something that we should be all open to as Muslims. So when it comes to education and knowledge, even though it was so important and emphasized in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that our state, our Muslim state, in most Muslim majority countries is, way below what we would hope to see. So, for example, internet. If you see some statistics about the use of internet in the Muslim world, you'll see that some of the most unproductive ways to use the internet will be in Muslim worlds. If you see what people are looking for, what people are searching for, they're not really focused on useful things, but mostly really unimportant and sometimes even harmful things. So we are not doing a good job in that regard. Literacy rates, again, in a lot of the Muslim majority countries, a lot of people, sometimes the majority, sometimes 50%, not only are lacking in the seek of knowledge, but they actually cannot even read and write. The most basic level of education is lacking, where people spend their entire lives without being able to read a single word or write a single word. Very sad state of our, education and knowledge in the Muslim communities. Obviously, other things that we can talk about, no scientific research whatsoever. The Western countries spend hundreds of billions, maybe collectively, on scientific research. If you look at the entire Muslim Islamic countries spend on scientific research, and maybe it will not even equal the budget of one American university, for example, entire Muslim world. So imagine how the importance that we give as Muslim communities, 1.5, 1.8 billion Muslim around the world, how much importance do we give to knowledge and education, where this is what we are supposed to be learning from the Prophet. So again, assessment here, self-assessment is very important. Why? Because in this modern 21st century world, as Muslims, we have to try to follow the footsteps of the Prophet. We have to identify what we're lacking to be able to see what we can focus our energy on. So second thing I would like to also talk about is the contributions to your society and contributions to the world from your place, again, as an ordinary Muslim. So what did the Prophet say there that we can follow his footsteps in? So one hadith that I love, أحب العباد إلى الله أنفعهم للناس. Allah loves most those who are beneficial to people. And he didn't say those who are beneficial to Muslims, as we know. So any benefit that you can do to your society, to people, wherever they are, with, from any background, from any religion, that's something that the Prophet encourages us to do. It's really countless. We can go on and on just to say some of these things. For example, the Prophet said, "Afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am," spread peace and give food for people to eat, and obviously especially in poor communities. And spread peace is a very important thing. When we talk about especially that there is as we know, perception of Muslims are not very much advocates of peace, but here the Prophet said spread peace. This is something that we should be actively doing. Other things about the contributions to the world, one thing I would like to focus on also, the Prophet ﷺ said, if the day of judgment is upon us and you can plant a tree, go ahead and plant the tree. Environment, right? Now a lot of people care about the environment, planting trees. And in this very striking hadith, the Prophet said, even if the world is about to end, you can go ahead and still plant that tree, even though the world is ending. Very high, emphasis here that the Prophet gave to the environment, and now we understand it even better than before. We understand the impact of the environment on people's health, on people's life. So back then, maybe people, a tree is a good thing, gives us some fruits, but we know better that it really goes way beyond the simple effect that for example, that nature has. Another hadith that I love here is, one of the characteristics of Iman is, in Arabic, izahatul adha an al-tariq, to remove harm from the roads. And we can look at this in many different ways. On the most direct level, it's really, if you walk somewhere and you see like a stone or something, as a believer, you should go ahead and remove it so that people do not get harmed by it. But of course, we can expand that to many other things. Removing anything that's harmful to people, right? That's it. That is izahat al-adha, that we remove whatever is harmful. Again, that's a contribution of a modern Muslim to the world, should be in some of these things that the Prophet mentioned. So spreading peace, taking care of the environment, removing harm, any kind of harm that we can remove. So that's something that we should strive to. But again, now let's look at that and let's assess our state. Contributions to the world. Again, maybe self-criticism, maybe a negative outlook, but that's the reality, and we have to be honest with ourselves. What did we contribute to the world as Muslims? For example, one example, I come from Egypt, and in a country that's in the Arab world, and I have to be very critical of how we, for example, we used oil money. Allah blessed some Muslim countries with trillions of dollars of very easy money, right? Oil money that came to us. What did we do with it? What contribution did we use this money to do in the world? I think, reality speaks for itself. We don't have to talk about it. We were talking about scientific research, and we haven't contributed anything to the world. Everything that we're doing now, for example, this tool that we're using now, Zoom, we are using this tool to speak about the Prophet's life. However, as societies, we haven't contributed anything to creating these kinds of tools to make, for example, communication easy between people. We are really dependent on others to use these tools as well. So contribution, again, we are really lacking in terms of contribution to the world. So the third thing also, again, I'm trying to look at this from a very limited in the meaning of from a very personal way level. As a modern Muslim, very ordinary Muslim, what should we look at? Another thing that I also love to look at, as we try to follow the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ, is a topic that's very dear to people during these times, which is self-improvement, right? If you go into any bookstore now, go to that self-improvement section, you'll find hundreds and thousands of books. So self-improvement is a very dear topic to people, and it's understandable, it's normal, because as humans, we try to improve ourselves. We try to see where we're lacking, and it's just a human nature that people do. And one thing that's very relevant, one hadith that's very relevant, especially in our modern times, that I also think about it a lot, is مَا قَلَّ وَكَفَى خَيْرٌ مِمَّا كَثُرَ وَأَلَّى. So speaking of modern Muslims, this hadith is very, very relevant to our time. So what does it mean? The Prophet ﷺ said, something small but sufficient is much better than something that's greater in quantities but distracting. Meaning, it's better to have a few number of things that suffice you, that meet your needs, than to have many, many things, because they will become distracting. This hadith, only in terms of modern self-improvement, I think it's very, very important. And even we have seen now trends like, a simple living, for example, minimalism, as people call it. It's really this hadith, right? Minimalism is this hadith. And it's very important to think of this as we think about self-improvement, because in our life today, we have a lot of distractions, not only in stuff, but also in digital stuff, right? If you hold your phone, you can be distracted for hours looking at Facebook, looking at YouTube. So hours and hours can go by without anything useful. Why? Because you have an unlimited supply of choices. And here the Prophet, if we remember this, it doesn't matter how many things I can look at, how many things I can do, how many things I can use. Let me focus on the few things that bring benefit to me. So that's one way that we can self-improve following this teaching of the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, many other things, again, that we can talk for hours about. For example, cleanliness. One thing that now, again, as now it's part of life, to go and brush your teeth, but the Prophet told us that 1400 years ago. So there is a hadith where the Prophet said, if I wasn't to make it very hard for my ummah, I would order them to brush their teeth before each prayer. Right? So, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ has the Sunnah of the Miswak. He used it all the time. So imagine, he told us we should really do it 5 times a day. So cleanliness was something very important that the Prophet emphasized. Fasting, not only the fasting of Ramadan, it's Sunnah of the Prophet to fast Mondays and Thursdays. And again, now, today, if you look at all the health topics and videos, they talk about intermittent fasting and how it's important for your health and so on, without any religious thought behind it. So that's self-improvement. So if we assess, let's now move, look at the other side and assess our state as Muslims. Some of the things that I mentioned here, again, we are lacking. And let's talk about cleanliness. I was talking about cleanliness, how cleanliness is important for a Muslim. We do, wudu, we do all this. But just one simple look at the state of the majority of Muslim cities, for example, that speaks for itself, where we are, right? That's very clear self-assessment. And it's a shame that, Muslim countries are not known for cleanliness in their cities, but this is something that you can actually find in Western and maybe more modern Asian countries. So we are also, again, lacking in that. And of course, when we talk about self-improvement, it's something that even though it focuses on the individual, when you improve yourself, now this adds up to be a stronger community, to be a stronger Muslim nations. So we are also lacking in that because we don't improve ourselves on an individual level the proper way. That's why as communities, we are also weak. So I'll move on to the topic. The fourth thing that I would like to focus on, again, as we follow the footsteps of the Prophet in the 21st century, is al-akhlaq. Al-akhlaq, if we want to summarize it, like more a character, this is the way you treat people. Al-akhlaq it has everything to do with the way we treat people. And this, again, this is a topic that you can have, the whole day talking about the Prophet's example, how he was in his, interactions with people, but also about the Prophet's teachings, what he, many hadith that speak about akhlaq and how we should be treating people and so on. And we can mention so many examples. The Prophet ﷺ, he was known for his smile, and he even said, smile, your smile in the face of your fellow human being is a charity. That's a form of charity that doesn't cost anything. And we all know the impact, of a smile. When you meet someone who's smiling in your face, makes you feel better, very positive, and many other things. Of course, he was known even before he became a messenger, before the message. He was known in his community as a Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful and the honest. This is part of akhlaq, the way you treat with, you treat people, you treat them with honesty, you only say the truth. So this is something that also very highly emphasized. Of course, all the makarim al-akhlaq, as we say. So again, this is a topic that we are all familiar with, but we're very lacking in that regard as well. As Muslims, we know it, that Prophet ﷺ emphasized al-akhlaq very much. But what do we do on our daily life, right? You find someone saying, "Oh, I love the Prophet ﷺ, I go to the mosque," but let's look at them in their day-to-day interactions. And now let's do some assessment of that, al-akhlaq, again, honesty, right? We say honesty. One thing, and just maybe something a little bit interesting, or maybe, I don't know if it's funny, but let's say about honesty in trade, right? Again, and we're very lacking there in our Muslim societies, where, sometimes it's not very common to trust a trader, for example. People have, have suspicions. And one thing I was talking about, something funny, which is bargaining. I personally hate bargaining, right? Like if you go, it's very common in some societies and in our Muslim world, you want to buy something, you don't really know what it costs. And, the merchant tells you a price and you have to negotiate. If you don't negotiate, you'll probably have a bad deal. For myself, personally, that's very annoying. I like to go into a Western shop and everything has a price written on it, and I don't have to think about it, right? In my opinion, this comes back to honesty in trade. We're not honest in our trade, because in reality, if people rely so much on this bargaining, that means you are tricking some people. Some people are overpaying while others are paying a fair price. So that's not honesty. I'll end with one thing also that saddens me a lot in terms of akhlaq, is especially when it comes to religion. You'll find a lot of religious people, so-called religious people, who are very harsh and very rude in their treatment of others, especially of those that they perceive as non-religious, right? And sometimes you'll see the way they speak to, for example, a woman that's not properly dressed in their opinion. They'll be very harsh, they'll be very rude, they'll even use bad words, insulting people. Why? In the name of religion, which amazes me. It's amazing that in the name of religion, some people can become very harsh and very rude. And that's completely opposite to, again, the footsteps of the Prophet in akhlaq and treating people. The fifth thing, or the last thing I would like to focus on, again, as I was thinking of what can I do as a Muslim in the 21st century to follow the footsteps, one very relevant and important thing in our life today is that the Prophet also emphasized is working to reduce or eliminate poverty in our world. That's a topic that's very dear to my heart since I was young, especially I grew up in Egypt. I've used to seeing a lot of poverty around me. I know all the brothers and sisters also grew up in other Muslim countries where we see a lot of these, signs of extreme poverty in our societies, sometimes just as you walk, and you see it. And the Prophet, again, we can say so much about his teachings in that regard. The Prophet said, a believer, you're not a believer if you sleep full and your neighbor is hungry, right? If you know that your neighbor is hungry, you're not a believer if you don't try to help them. That's something. And many examples. I mean, I cannot say all of it, but because we all know of it. But this is, again, a topic that's very dear to my heart. And again, let's do an assessment. I'm going to end actually on a positive note, because my assessment was, in all the previous areas we were lacking, but in this one, I'm going to end with a positive note. But again, in terms of assessment, we are not doing well either. we have a lot of work to do. As Muslims, we really have to pay attention to that. Some of the poorest people in the world are Muslims in our countries. We do not have any systematic, any methodological fighting of poverty in our societies. I know some actually very good examples back home, for example, in Egypt, of some people, some rich families who are doing a lot of good things to fight poverty, but it's not the norm. It's an exception. So this shouldn't be the exception. So I will actually conclude with something that's very positive about this, because something that we can learn of. One of the books that I read, when I was young, is a story of a man called Mohamed Yunus. Some of you might know him, some of you might not know him. But when I read his book about something that he did, I'm going to mention, I consider him one of my all-time heroes. What did he do? So this guy, he studied economics in the 70s. He's from Bangladesh, and he established something that's now known as Grameen Bank. So Mohamed Yunus, and that's a long story. You can check out his book. It's called Banker to the Poor. That's the book where he told his story, how he studied economics in England, and then he went back to his home country of Bangladesh, and he was shocked to find extreme poverty, and he was shocked to find that some poor people who lived in slavery, all they needed was maybe $30 to take them out of this extreme slavery, to give them some tools to be able to start a very small business. And he tried to go to the banks and find a way to lend the money to the poor, and they all mocked him. There is nothing, we don't lend small money, we lend millions of dollars, and of course we lose sometimes most of it, it doesn't matter. So he came up with microcredit. So Grameen Bank, the bank that he established in Bangladesh, and now it actually exists all over the world, it's based on this idea. It's lending to the poor, and very small amounts of money that allow the very poor to come out of poverty. They pay it back and so on. So in my opinion, and this guy, he doesn't, in my opinion, he does way more for Islam, way more for the Prophet's way of life, and following the footsteps of the Prophet, even though he doesn't speak about religion. He's a Muslim, as we know, but he doesn't speak about religion. He went there into the world and he did something. So he did, he contributed to the world. And he also did something that the Prophet encouraged, and he did it in a systematic way. He really introduced a change that will remain for a long time. That's, as we know, sadaqah jariyah, as we know, one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged is a charity that lives on and on. So I wanted to end with a positive note, positive example. He's actually still alive today. He actually also is a Nobel laureate because of his work in economy. So I wanted to end with a real life example that is, in my opinion, that has nothing to do with religious scholars, with religious talks, but a real example of a Muslim man who did something. He really followed, in my opinion, the footsteps of the Prophet, and really improved the lives of Muslims and non-Muslims, and something that we can learn, from in our modern life as 21st century Muslims. So I will end there. Again, Jazakallah khair, brother, and all the brothers for listening. And thank you I hope it was a little bit beneficial. Jazakallah.
Again, Allahu Akbar, my dear brother Mohamed Shedou, for a very insightful, enlightening, and very historic reflection of Prophet Muhammad's accomplishments or achievements, and also tying that to our present state of being. While I do agree with a lot of with everything you said, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of key points so that our audiences do not feel differently about what was just said, to issues with regards to our backwardness in our societies. I fully agree with that. A few of us realize that the present day powerful and prosperous Europe passed through a long historic period called the Dark Ages. It lasted for more than 8,000 years of stagnation and backwardness, extending from the 5th century after Christ until the Renaissance in the 18th century. It was during this period that the Islamic civilization started with the advent of Islam in 610 AC. This period of Islamic history lasted until the beginning of the 20th century. The 7th to 15th century of this period is called the golden era of history. Muslim scientists and other intellectuals ushered in this era with accomplishments that were truly astounding, with developments in all possible areas, including modern medicine, chemistry, and algebra. So by stating this, I highlight a couple of key accomplishments just as a summary to tie to what my dear brother Mohamed Shedou said, so at least we have a complete picture of what he really was referring to us rightfully and very timely. Hygiene, for instance, the fact is that Europeans learned the very basics of hygiene and cleanliness from Muslims because of the cold weather. Bad thing was a rarity even among the royalty in Europe, and the stench of European cities was unbearable. So cleanliness is incumbent on Muslims and the 5 daily obligatory prayers. So basically what Brother Muhammad said, which really is enlightening to me, and also connecting those dots with what we are really doing, basically. Muslims brought these core values to some of these dark, hated societies, and I mean, the early eras of the history, I would say. For instance, wheel and water pump. The Persian wheel and water pump are both Muslim inventions. Water drawn, flowing through canals for irrigation and other uses was introduced in Al-Andalusia, or Al-Andalus, we call it, the present-day Spain, by Muslims, as well as the hammams, bathrooms with hot and cold running water for washing and taking bath. Another core one that I could remember is food antiquity. A talented musician, Ibn Nafi, turned out to be quite a social dynamo. He reformed the Andalusian cuisine and suggested covering of tables with washable cloths. The other one, you could say, education. Aside from such essential trivia, as you know, learning and pursuing education are an integral part of Islam. Complying with the revelations of Quran, which started with the word Iqra, read or recite. The Prophet, peace be upon him, preached and perfected that message, especially in the early Muslim community, but as a legacy for all of us, remain to this day and will carry on to the ends. Hospitals. Another priority of Muslims was establishing hospitals to take care of the sick and needy. These hospitals were several centuries in advance of the Europeans. Europeans took their cue from these institutions and their teaching methods as standard for students in medical schools. Pharmacology. In pharmacology, also Muslim physicians made their lasting contributions. They not only discovered many herbal medicines, but also perfected techniques of chemical extractions that are employed today. The first official pharmacy was established in Baghdad by Harun al-Rashid, and by the by the times of Al-Ma'mun, it employed highly qualified pharmacists who were licensed and inspected by the state. So Jazakumullah khair. I just wanted to say, add a couple of those points to the very, very noble speech of my dear brother Mohamed Shedou, which is always inspiring to me and always critiques these really taboos of the societies that really we are so distanced from the core teachings of Islam, the core teachings of this noble being, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.